Welcome to With You Podcast,
where we explore relationships and life transitions.
I'm David.
And I'm Tara.
And we're back at it.
We're back.
This might be an interesting one. We're a little jet lagged.
Oh, man. I mean, I feel like we're just saying this at the beginning of every time, but this is how this season has been for us. We just arrived from overseas last night.
Yeah, less than 24 hours.
24 hours ago.
Yeah.
And I thought I was doing pretty well this morning.
Yeah.
When I got up at 2:40 a.m.
I know.
And I was eager to work and have coffee and felt like I'm doing great. And a few hours ago, it hit me like a truck.
I know. I know. We had our lunch. We planned this out. And then, yeah, we are both a little foggy.
We're pretty fatigued.
Tired.
Pretty gritty.
Our eyes are gritty. Yeah. But
so we're going to talk about something relevant.
Yeah. Living, working, experiencing cross culture.
Yeah. And partly this is motivated by what we were just doing.
Yeah.
Because we were working with people who actually honestly kind of makes me feel like we have nothing to say on this subject. But
all right,
we're talking about
short podcast then.
Cross-cultural living. And we just spent time with people who live that to the extreme, like really living in cultures that are very different than our own. So it's inspired a lot of thoughts for us on what that's like.
And hearing it was humbling hearing about birth process and relationships and all the things that just
living
take for
and working
granted.
And doing family life in a place where it's completely different and you're far away from all that's familiar.
Yeah.
And so all of those people that we just met would be great to speak to this. But we have our,
they're scattered.
We'll just share on their behalf.
Yeah, they're scattered all over the world. And so we're going to do our best to represent both their stories and also our own small little times of living cross-culturally.
Yeah.
So we thought about, let's talk about cross-cultural experiences and the sticking with our theme, the play and the pain.
Right, because we're talking about playfulness and pain. And we thought, well, this covers all of that because when you live cross-culturally, there's all the discovery and the play of new things, but there's also a lot of challenge and sometimes pain.
Yeah. Well, and I think our fatigue is a perfect place to do this from, because I think when I think of cross-cultural living, everything is just harder. And I feel like this is going to be harder for us today.
It's definitely already harder. Our eyes are bloodshot.
I know. Just don't watch the video.
Well, and let's so for context, I mean, we haven't spent a lot of time actually living cross-culturally for long periods of time. Right. I've lived in Africa and Australia for years at a time, but most of our experiences
I've lived outside of Michigan for a long time, and that feels cross-cultural.
You're always living cross-culturally when you're not in Michigan.
When I'm not in Western Michigan, it feels like a foreign land. And when
I'm in Michigan, it feels a little bit like a foreign land.
I mean, to just little things like I didn't know the phone book didn't have 2/3 of it being the letter V last names. It was remarkable.
Yeah.
And
it's remarkable that
just little things
there's so
like
many vans in Michigan.
All the vans.
Yeah. So we've lived cross-culturally together for some months at a time sometimes. I lived in Japan. You lived in the UAE. Yeah. That was before we were married.
Yeah.
But Hungary together, and some that, are a few weeks. So we get a little bit immersed.
So we have a little taste, but it's not our lifestyle that we're talking about.
Yeah. So there's people who could speak more to this, but we just thought it would be fun to explore because it's a high value for us.
It is.
Traveling and not just to places that are really comfortable, because it's a huge thing that contributes to growth and flexibility.
Yeah, I'm tempted to go right to some of the out of order things because it expands, right?
So you're going to expand my flexibility.
I'm going to expand your flexibility. So let's go to number 3.
Oh boy, okay.
But I think when we live cross-culturally, when we've just traveled, it expands our way of experiencing the world. Like what we think is normal is so contextual.
Right, and it's funny because we put this in our category of the fun and
play
adventure things, because we're kind of thinking in the terms of sort of positive and
Challenging.
challenges,
Yeah.
not negative, but challenges.
Yeah.
And we put the stretching and being out of your comfort zone as a positive
Yeah. And
because I think it really is to open up your perspective on the world and people.
And I think you have to go into that realizing, oh, I'm not going to just go to wherever and think that it's all going to be the same or people are going to respond to me the same. I think about a time we went out for dinner in Greece. And we weren't living cross culturally, but we expected that we would eat at a certain time, that the waiter would be responsive in a certain way.
We
And
were newbies, let's just say, to that kind of culture
but
at that time.
But that was fascinating,
It
right?
was.
And we had to be flexible because it could have been very, very frustrating. So I think
Yes.
that space between play and pain, a lot of it is expectations that you bring into the game.
That's kind of what adventure is right on the edge of play and
Yeah.
pain.
Well, that crossed over for me from play of
Having-
expanding my horizons to pain of like, bring me the check now. So the story was
yeah.
we went to go out to dinner with a big group.
Yeah.
And we were teaching abroad, and we thought we would go at a culturally reasonably appropriate time for dinner. I think we went out at like 8:30.
Oh yeah, I was thinking it was 7:30 or 8 or so. Yeah,
Yeah.
like late for us.
Yeah, super late. We
Yeah.
eat like 6:00. And so we're like, oh, we're going to be culturally appropriate and go out.
I wouldn't go that far.
Well, I was thinking this is a stretch and
Yeah.
we're going to be culturally
Yeah.
appropriate. And there was nobody at the restaurant.
Yeah. Right. And I think some people in the group were apologizing to the restaurant owner and saying, it's too bad you're not getting much business. And he said, this wouldn't even be open if we didn't have you guys. We open at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I shouldn't say crazy. It felt crazy because it was totally different. It
Yeah.
expanded my idea of when dinner is served.
Right. It's a small thing, but it's a big thing.
And when we said, what is there to eat? And there wasn't necessarily a menu. He listed off a lot of things in Greek, and then he took you into the kitchen
Yeah.
to find our meal.
I think that was a different time in Greece, but yes, we asked for fish
Yeah.
and he said, follow me. And I had to just get up from the table. I didn't know where I was going.
Yeah.
He took me into the kitchen to a
we
tank
thought-
full of fish and he said, pick one. I didn't know what they were, how they would taste. And
Yeah, you
Yeah.
picked one, or
I
what it
picked
cost.
one. Or what it cost.
Yeah, I was a
yeah.
little worried about that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And we had a delightful meal,
Yeah.
and then we asked for the check. And what did he say?
No.
No. And he walked away.
You haven't been here long enough.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of three things that expanded: when we eat, how you order food, and when you collect the bill. These are all little small things about expanding, but it is something that goes to pointing out we have expectations, and a lot of times they're culturally based.
Yeah.
And challenged.
Yes.
All right.
All of those are true.
What number?
Well, you went out of order, so I don't know where we are, but that's okay. That's part of the experience, isn't
I know. It's great.
So just, I mean, the general, and these all are somewhat
Blend
the
together,
same. They do
yeah.
blend together, but part of the fun of cross-cultural living is the exposure to different ways of thinking and being, not just thinking in ways that we're not used to, but just the entire way of being,
Yeah.
Entire way of life, the language. I mean, all of that.
Yeah.
We're all right. We're all right. We can
Everything's-
do this. We're staying on
everything's okay.
track.
Well-
we're not foggy.
I think that
We're kind of illustrating. We honestly didn't plan it this way, but we're kind of illustrating how we feel when we're living there. Like you're just a little off. You're just a little like behind.
and not knowing, is it my
Is
turn
this-
or not my turn? Is it your turn?
Is this right or wrong? I don't know. But yeah.
Well, I think I can think of a story of a
different ways of
Yeah,
thinking.
different ways of
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah.
And it was when I was teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So I was teaching
Oh,
a
yeah.
class
In
in
Hungary.
Eger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And two stories that highlight cross-cultural problems. And I don't think
Okay,
I've
but we're
talked
on the
about them.
fun part.
This is the fun part because I learned a
Okay.
lot.
Okay.
So people might experience this as painful, but it was fun. So I walk into this class and it's all Hungarian students that speak English. And I said, let's put our chairs in a circle.
Hmm.
And they said, you're doing it wrong. And I said,
Well, yeah, that's not done.
I was like, what am I doing wrong? And they're like, teaching. And I was like, okay, so how should I be teaching? And they're like, well, we should be sitting in chairs. And they said, what we do
In lines, in
in
rows.
rows,
Yeah, facing
looking
the
at
front.
the
Right.
professor. Now, the
Right.
nice thing was when I walked into the class, everyone stood up and clapped. And I really wish that
You
would
enjoyed
happen.
that.
I enjoyed that a ton.
That was a different way of being that you'd like to bring home.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I told my US students that. And so one semester, one student each time would stand up and clap, and it would be a slow clap.
Oh, no, that's not the same.
No, but it was funny because it was cultural kind of response. So back to the story. They said, you're teaching wrong. What you have to do in Hungary is you open the box in our forehead, you put all the information in terms of teaching content,
Hmm.
close the box, and then we tell you what's in the box. And that is education. And I've heard not just Hungary, but some of my students from India, other parts of the world, that's the educational
Yeah.
process is content. And I was teaching more experiential, and it was a problem. And we had to negotiate that. The other fun teaching moment was I like doing group work. You and I, when we talk together, we do group work. So I
Hmm.
thought, all right, so I'll do some group work. And I had them all in groups and I asked them to pick one person from each group to come with me into the hallway because I was going to give them a prompt to do role play. And I didn't want the family role plays to know
Yeah.
what was
So
going
they
on.
had to hear it on their own.
So we go out, I give the students a prompt, we come back in, and everybody looks really distressed in the classroom. And they're very kind of pale. And I was like, what's the matter? They're like, we don't understand what you're doing to us. You made us pick someone from our group and you took them away.
And they disappeared.
And we didn't think they were coming back. And now these were all people that had grown up after the systems change, after the 90s. But yet there was this cultural influence of authority is threatening.
Hmm.
And if they don't do things a certain way, there was institutional fear. And I didn't realize that. And I
You stepped
made,
on that.
oh man, horrible mistake. It took a lot of time to repair that.
Mhm.
So what we think is normal in teaching and thinking can be very, very different. And having to be flexible on both sides of realizing there's going to be mistakes.
Mhm.
It was such a good learning experience for me, but it was humbling too, because you can do harm when you don't intend to do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was exposed to lots of different ways of thinking.
Yeah. And that one was one that was, you wouldn't want it to be the same there as it
No.
was here. But there are a lot of things that are different ways of being that we really enjoy,
Yeah.
like a slower pace of life in a lot of places we visit.
Oh, yes.
We really enjoy, try to recreate when we come back.
Yeah.
Learning how to live without such a high value on productivity and time and,
Hmm.
list making. I don't know.
What is one of the things from the various cultures we've experienced in the last 12 months that you enjoy that wish we had brought here? I can think of one, but
Well, I can't bring it because we're not set up for it, but like the outdoor cafe culture in a lot of places in Europe, lots of gathering spaces that are just built in to their architecture, to their towns. And so people sit around in the evening and you see people and you're outside and you're having long meals, and we're not set up for that.
yeah.
I
No.
really enjoy that when we're there.
Yeah.
And it's really hard when we come back and we go to a restaurant and the waiter's there every 2 minutes trying to get us to leave.
Right?
You know?
Yeah.
So I
Or
do
asking
enjoy
us,
that.
lots of questions like, how's your soup? Well, I haven't had it yet.
Yeah.
Um, it's a little intrusive.
Yeah. So I do enjoy that
Yeah.
about most of the places that are not the US.
Yeah. I enjoy Turkish baths.
Oh no.
I would love for that to be something here in the States. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's places like that, but
Yeah.
natural springs
Yeah.
and just
Well, and that's another
bath
gathering
culture.
place where
Yeah.
they just use, like in Hungary, we'd see all the men sitting there playing chess and spending the evening together.
Yeah, it reminds me on the plane, some of the adverts that were on the screen while we were flying. One of them said, what's the difference between the US and most of Europe, and why is it so different? And it's because there's these third spaces, not home, not work, but
Yeah.
these outdoor
That's what
spaces,
I was talking
baths.
about.
Yeah, that's what made me think of that. And it's really kind of known
Yeah.
because we don't have many third spaces of just gathering, like
No.
people wandering around the streets or
Yeah.
going to cafes.
So that's a positive of cross-cultural living because I think it helps you meet the people in your community too,
Yeah,
living somewhere else. And some people are living in the US cross-culturally and they miss that.
yeah,
And they miss easier ways to be with your community. So
yeah.
depending,
Being with rather than doing.
yeah,
Human being versus human doing.
yeah,
We tend to be good human doings here in the U.S.
that is true. So on to our next doing.
I would love for a siesta.
That's another way of being in another culture where they have enforced rest. Well, not enforced, but a culture of rest.
You will
maybe
rest now.
you will rest. Well, things shut down. I mean,
Yeah.
you're. It's not just encouraged; it's kind of necessary because shops aren't open and schools aren't open, and
Yeah.
so
And the thing we were talking about of eating late is also a part of that. So there's this whole intricate process around siesta that leads to meal times being different, leads to family times being different, leads to the pacing of life being
Yeah.
different. So it's not something you can just plug in.
Yeah.
It has to be a whole culture.
Yeah. So that's a positive for us is just seeing those different ways of being. And it doesn't mean it's a positive or a negative thing. It's just a different thing,
Yeah.
learning these different ways of being and how we see things through the lens that we live in. And so just seeing things through a different lens helps you know that there's a lot of different ways to do the same thing. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
My other favorite thing about cross-cultural living is just constant new experiences, new sensory experiences. That's play.
Yeah.
If you talk about play and discovery and adventure, smelling smells you never smell, which can be good or bad. Taste, especially. We always talk about food, but I mean, new tastes. And that's a confounding thing for me that a lot of people don't love about traveling to a new place is they're scared of new foods or they just flat out say, I don't eat food from this country, which I find amazing. It's not always your favorite thing, but it's a really fun thing to experience flavors and things that you never tried before.
And I think it's on some level, it's a choice. It's a mental choice you have to make because I grew up eating SpaghettiOs out of the can, all sorts of processed meats that were mostly hot dogs.
You had a typical American 1970s casserole diet as a child.
And cheese that came wrapped individually.
Or out of a can.
Cheese, or a spray can of cheese. Yeah, it wasn't the most healthy
And it's
diet.
not for your mother's lack of being able to cook. She's a great cook.
No,
it was
she
just
is.
typical family food then.
Yeah, and I think
Jello and
Jello
macaroni and cheese.
with vegetables in the Jello. I mean, all of the 1970s U.S. food, but it was bland. I mean, so you think about that Jello, mac and cheese, hot dogs. It's all kind of plain. And yet, I'm surprised when we talk to other people when we're traveling abroad of how I really have no restrictions on what I'm willing
know.
to
It
eat.
is kind of surprising. You and your brother are good at being adventurous with foods. I mean, I think you would even try things that I wouldn't want to try.
Well, I did in Gibraltar. I ate things that you refused to eat.
Well, that was a different situation.
That was at
We
the
were in Gibraltar yesterday.
yeah.
Yesterday?
Yesterday.
Or the day before yesterday.
It doesn't matter.
So really recently.
No one cares.
And we made a mistake.
Yeah, we chose poorly.
So we had been in Spain and enjoying the lovely flavors of Spain. And we
So
took a
good.
side trip to Gibraltar, and it's England.
Yeah.
So we thought, how fun. Let's go to a pub and have, fish and chips or steak pie.
Yeah.
And
And this isn't about British cuisine.
no,
This is
we
about this
enjoy. In
restaurant.
fact, I ordered what I ordered because I remembered a delightful steak and ale pie that I had near Westminster Abbey. And I was thinking
yes.
about that pie
And
when
that
I ordered.
that Yorkshire pudding.
Yes,
Oh,
but
so good.
but the place that we visited, we should have known. I mean,
Yeah. Well, let's talk through the mistakes we made.
mistakes we made.
We saw this really cool facade and thought, oh, let's eat at
It
the
was-
Angry Fryer.
well, we shouldn't name it. We probably shouldn't name
Well,
it.
you know what? Sorry, if you're in Gibraltar
Because
listening,
we won't leave a review, but this is a review. I
don't eat there.
don't. Yeah, we sat. It was raining, and so we sat in a booth indoors.
Yes.
And as I looked around, there was just dirt like I haven't seen before. It was dirty, and it got me thinking about the kitchen.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't know if this is a good idea, but we were already seated, and this
And
was
we
the
were
time. This was
hungry.
the moment
Yeah.
we should have changed our mind.
Yeah. But we're like,
But-
let's soldier on.
Yes.
We're good
That's when
adventurers.
That's when a good adventure can go bad.
Yeah. You probably should read the room and go, oh, look at all the regulars that are here from the Gibraltarians. We're only having pints and not
Yes,
eating the
not
food.
food. Yeah.
And so we
That's
didn't.
your first
that was the second
clue.
thing. I think the first thing was the cleanliness,
Uh-huh.
where we really didn't even want to sit
Yeah,
down.
and we've eaten at a lot of hole in the wall or street food places that are amazing.
Fabulous.
But I had a bad feeling, and then I ordered the steak and ale pie.
Yeah.
And
I
it
had
came
the
out-
mushroom, chicken and mushroom
And it was
pie.
a sad blob of mushiness.
Well, first off, let's tell what normal meat pies look like in the UK and
Well,
Australia.
I mean, I think there's lots of ways you can make a meat pie.
yeah, but this
I
was like a
expected
slice
this-
of pie.
It was cut. It was a wedge cut out of a larger pie.
yeah, it was like a slice
And-
of pie,
Yeah, it was.
which isn't.
And brown ooze was coming out of it.
yes, and
I'm sorry if I'm
the-
making anybody feel sick, but
the crust was soggy.
This is
and
sensory. I was talking about fun sensory things, and this is where we're going.
the plate was like 400 degrees because I'm pretty sure it was microwave.
Yeah, and it came with chips, fries, which I didn't expect, and they were like neon yellow
and
and
soggy. Yeah.
Oh,
And then it had mushy peas, which are rough anyway, even in the UK.
and those are fine. But I pushed it around, took a couple bites, and my stomach was churning, and I just said, I can't do it. I would rather drink the Masai milk in Kenya.
Yeah, that was
That was
good.
fresh. That
Yeah.
was good.
Well, fresh-ish.
Well,
but
yeah.
the pieces, there's going to be sights and sounds that are amazing.
Mhm.
And then there's using our judgment
Yes.
around sights and sounds
Yes.
that probably aren't amazing, and aren't cultural cultural differences. It's just bad food. And
that can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
That can happen anywhere. But for the most part, it's fun
It
to
is
have
fun.
new experiences.
But even now, it gave us a great story, even though it gave me a little bit of a tummy problem.
I know. And I had to leave it. Like I just left the whole pile on my plate, and we just had to go
Yeah.
walking around in the rain and trying not to think about it.
And we went from there to playing with monkeys.
We did. Well, we didn't play with them. I didn't want to
I was so
be
trying to get
involved
one
with
to
the
jump on you.
Gibraltar monkeys.
Yeah. Anyway,
But that was a new and different experience.
that was
Yes.
a new and different experience. The only natural habitat for monkeys in Europe.
Yeah.
So, fun fact.
We did. And well, hey, that's another good point.
Yeah.
You learn a lot of fun facts when you live cross culturally.
You really do.
You learn a lot of little things you never would have known
Yeah.
otherwise.
History and
History, yes. Haven't we learned? I guarantee I've learned 1,000% more about the history of the world
Yeah.
with our travels than I ever learned in my high school
Well,
history class.
and how about geography?
Yes, geography too. We visited places I didn't know existed. And you hear them talk about redrawing of borders and, wars and stuff that I just
Yeah.
never would have known about.
The geopolitical issues going on make a lot more sense when
Right.
you're in the communities, walking the land, talking to people,
Yes.
and it's like,
Than in a
oh,
dusty
this
old
makes more
textbook.
sense.
Yeah.
Even like our time in Central and Eastern Europe, a lot of the immigration issues that are happening now are 700 years old. They're thinking about things that happened
Yeah.
700
Yeah.
years ago that are affecting policy.
Yeah.
And you're like,
so that's a good
oh,
point that we didn't write down as just context, like
yeah.
world context. You learn a lot.
Yeah, like
By-
I now know that they're where Albania and North Macedonia are, which I didn't know before.
Yep.
And so we
When
have
you've been there, you have to know where it is.
yeah, and so the fun part of this is really an attitudinal, but it doesn't mean giving up your judgment. And I think that's the tension of where's the line between I have to say no and where's
Yeah,
the
and we're
other side
talking
of it.
about our travels that are short term,
Yeah.
right? So people who are living long term in a cross cultural context, there's different things to consider because you're living there and deciding, like you said, how much of my original language do I put aside and my customs and all those things when you're living for a long time.
Yeah, and I think it's a challenge for families, like some of the folks we talked with, of the parents have grown up someplace else most likely, and then are navigating this cultural difference as adults, and so
Right.
that's going to be different than kids that navigate it and then actually grow up in that culture. So
Right.
even in a family, you can have cultural tensions that the parents don't really understand, kind of that first generation, second generation,
Yeah.
either immigration or other things. I mean, we experienced that with Ryan helping us with language. When I was young therapist working in Southern Cal, realizing like, oh, parents need to be the authority and kids shouldn't be being responsible for things. And then we live in Hungary and we ask Ryan to speak for us because we can't navigate things and he has the language. And so you see, oh, we have to be open to different structures and hierarchy and different experiences, even within the family.
Well, maybe that should just bring us right into challenges.
All right. Pain.
Because the fun things
Pain and
are
challenges.
also the challenges sometimes. It can flip both ways. Are we recording?
I was
We're
just
checking all the things.
Yeah,
When we're tired, we sometimes make big mistakes.
Yeah, no, we are recording. That's good. So this is good that we're talking to you.
That's good because we can't do this again. So challenges of living cross culturally.
Yes.
There's a word for that.
Concentration. Oh, what is the word for that? Do you remember?
You wrote it down.
I know.
Culture shock.
Culture shock.
So what is culture shock?
So culture shock is an emotional, relational, psychological kind of response to unfamiliar environments, unfamiliar contexts. It often involves feeling confused, like we are,
Disoriented,
frustrated, and homesick, right? That there's a yearning for something familiar. So when you're stressed, we usually can deal with stress, but when we pass our ability to deal with that, that's what culture shock is. And I think it's both emotional and neurological. It's almost like a trauma response of we flip over to I can't do this anymore. I think of the one time I had culture shock and we weren't living very long in a place, but you sent me out for groceries. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I wouldn't call that culture shock, though.
I
That was
would.
just navigating buying groceries in a place where you don't know the language.
It was I left crying and without any groceries. That was the end of that story. That felt pretty shocking.
Yeah, and that was a failure to communicate. That was a communication challenge.
Yeah.
I think culture shock, I think it's deeper, honestly. Like, I think, when we're talking about our travels, there's a lot of fun things about the escape of it when you're traveling for a shorter term. Culture shock can come with a shorter term trip because it's just everything's unfamiliar.
Yeah.
But I think it feels like it's a longer term thing. Like you've settled in here, and there's the fun escape part is kind of over,
Yeah.
and it's the navigating life now in a
Mm-hmm.
place where you don't fully understand everything. And that grocery trip was part of that, not being able to order things or
Hey,
pay
yeah.
because they're saying the Hungarian words for
Money.
numbers and coins that we don't understand. Um,
I know. I did just open up my wallet and said,
just take whatever
take
you want.
whatever.
It all looks like Monopoly money to us. Just take, just whatever.
Yeah.
But I think there's a fatigue too that comes with like, oh, just everything feels harder.
Yeah.
Just directions, you know, knowing what's appropriate, being able to communicate, just the overall unfamiliarity of it all that can make you feel really off.
So would that be like when you came back from Kenya when you were 13?
Yeah, I mean, I often say reverse culture shock can be worse
Yeah.
than the culture shock, because when we moved to Kenya, that was exciting, and I had family there, and everything felt like adventure. There were a lot of hard things about the way we lived there, but coming back, you'd think, oh, it's going to feel familiar and fun and,
Mm-hmm.
comfortable. And it was not that at all because your worldview has been flipped
Mm.
so much that I think maybe a lot of other people who live cross culturally have that experience where coming home, which should feel like, yay,
Coming
I'm
home.
going home. I'm going
Yeah.
to feel comfortable and like I am where I belong. And it's kind of the opposite.
Mm.
It feels like now nobody gets who I am now.
Yeah.
And I don't get why things are done the way they're done here anymore because it doesn't reflect anything about the rest of the world. So that can be shocking.
That's got to be so hard because it's hard to adapt to the new culture, and then you do some adaptation,
Hmm.
but also desire the old ways, and you come back to the old ways, and they don't fit anymore.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
So
then
then,
there's not comfort there
right.
either
So you feel a bit like I don't fully belong
anywhere.
anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a term for that.
Yeah. Now they call it third culture kids,
Yeah.
kids who are born from parents who, usually it's used for US people living abroad, I think,
Yeah.
whose kids grow up in another culture, but their parents are American.
Yeah.
But it could apply to anyone who feels like they've left their home and coming back doesn't feel like home.
Yeah, I hear that from embassy families as well. Like you're moving around,
Mhm.
and there's this kind of dislocation.
Yeah.
It can be a physical dislocation, but what you're talking about is a cultural dislocation. Like, oh, I've changed so much that I'm this holding a lot of contradictions.
Mhm.
I have a lot of different ways of seeing the world that no longer agrees with
Yeah.
who I thought they
And you
would.
can be gone for a long time and come back, and it feels like everybody you left is the same as they were when you left, but everything in your world and your way of seeing things has changed.
Yeah. This week I talked with a guy named Jose, and he said the experience of not fitting in culturally is
Mhm.
like eating rice, noodles, and pizza with chopsticks. Because he's like, all of those things make sense in their spaces, and yet
Pizza with
I'm all of
chopsticks?
the, yeah. Well, that's the U.S. for him. There were all
Yeah.
these different cultural identities, and it's like for his experience of it is as a meal, I have rice, noodles, and pizza, and I'm using chopsticks to eat it all.
Yeah.
That
So
it doesn't make any
doesn't make
sense,
sense.
and it's so hard to do. Which now that I'm saying it doesn't make all that much sense to me, but it did in the moment that
Mhm.
he was like, I hold all these contradictions, and it doesn't seem like it works to anybody, but it works for me. And that kind of disconnect
Yeah.
was really, really hard. And I think families have a hard time because even within a family, the parents can feel like coming back home isn't as abruptly different as the kids do.
Yeah.
And so then they're stuck in this in between, and it's helpful to remember that of like exploring what are you needing, what rules are you working on, and how do we meet those needs within the rules as we navigate. And that's what we spent a lot of time doing this last week,
Yeah.
is coming alongside people and not having the answers like
Yeah.
here's the way to do it.
No, just yeah, just acknowledging it's hard
Yeah.
and it kind of amplifies everything else that's normally hard.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the truth of it about the challenges is that life has its own hard things and its own surprises, but living in a different culture that's not yours kind of amplifies all of that.
Yeah.
It just raises the difficulty level. It's like you have reached a new level and there's there's new challenges.
And
And
you
I mean,
have to
and
level up.
you have to level up, and language acquisition is a huge part of that, I think.
Yeah.
That's, I've said this before on the podcast too, that if I had a superpower,
It would be invisibility.
no,
Oh.
it would be being able to just be magically multilingual.
I believe you said omnilingual.
Did I?
You want to
Did I
know
say that?
all of the languages.
I think that's called a polyglot, isn't
Oh.
it? Someone who
I don't know, but I don't know what that means, but
you like that word?
hey.
Okay. We are not talking about what you think we're talking about.
All right. Well, so you want to be a
So
polyglot.
again, misunderstandings
Yes.
happen
We have those
when
a lot.
we don't speak the language.
English is a problem for me.
Yeah, and being misunderstood, that's like one of the things we humans hate the most.
That's right.
And it's easy to be misunderstood and to misunderstand when you're living cross-culturally.
Yeah, it really does. And so you want to speak all the languages so you can make sense of all of those things
Yeah.
and be able to communicate
To be understood and
everybody.
to understand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yeah.
leads into, if you can't do that, if you're a uniglot,
Like us.
yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like a unicorn. But if you can't, that can lead to a sense of isolation, and I think that's another pain point in living cross culturally.
Yeah.
Is isolation. Even as a family living cross culturally, you can feel isolated.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think you can find community in any new culture you live in for sure. You can find new friends, and a lot of cultures are very welcoming of new people, but you can still feel like an outsider. You
Yeah.
can still feel, and things are happening maybe back home that you're missing, so you can feel separated and isolated, and that can be exhausting too.
Yeah. And the work. So I had a grad student that was an international student shared with me. It's like having a backpack. We all have backpacks that are our culture. When we live cross culturally, there's just a lot more. So doing even little things feels like you're different because it takes so much more work. So it can be the communication piece, but it can also just be a felt like I'm
Right.
the only one struggling.
Yeah.
I'm the only one having to do this, where I have to do the assignments in a different language, have to navigate
I'm so
everything.
impressed by that. One of my little jobs I've had along the way, when you were in graduate school in California, I was doing editing, and a lot of the editing jobs I got were for grad students who English was not their first language, and they were writing papers, but they needed help just cleaning up kind of some of the grammar. And it was just amazing to me
Yeah.
how much extra work that is for somebody who's not their first language and they have to write an academic paper.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Vygotsky talks about how where we grow up in, the environment we grow up in, is what creates the culture, and then the culture creates the language, and how we speak helps how we think. So given our primary language helps us to think in a certain way,
Mhm.
and then learning something in a different language is a completely different way of thinking, and you can feel isolated that way too, of like everybody seems to get this, whether it's idioms or the mechanism of thinking about individualism. And I don't think that way. To write about it would be such a challenge,
Yeah, I
because it's a
can't.
different language and a completely different way of thinking.
Right.
So you can kind of emotionally be isolated relationally, but also the way that you see the world can feel pretty isolating.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
a hard part. And I think for us, the painful challenges is also if we're in a culture that's our dominant culture, or our primary culture, how are we seeing these things through others' eyes? How are we realizing, oh, it's not just pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but it's, oh, can I how do I navigate this to make it maybe a little bit, or at least I hold it with you, or a little
Mm-hmm.
bit easier
Mm-hmm.
for you to navigate the difficulties of life and not have extra things in your backpack that make the walk so much heavier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's affected me growing up in a small town in a very monocultural background.
Mm-hmm.
The traveling has opened me up to kind of a realization of, oh, there's so much more going on than just I'm teaching and people are learning.
Yeah. You said when we lived in Hungary, it gave you a lot of appreciation for your international grad students
Yeah.
because you realize how much harder life just is for them
Yeah. It's a,
living here, having to find transportation, having to understand our customs with, food and gestures and language and,
yeah.
being invited for holidays and,
Yeah.
all of those things that
And
are
being the authority and realizing how offensive I can be unintentionally. Now, I like being offensive if it's intentional,
okay.
but but unintentionally through
Yeah.
gestures or statements, and needing to have enough trust for both sides to be able to talk about that. And
Mm-hmm.
that frees up if there's enough space to be able to question and struggle together on these differences, frees up for different ways for both parties to navigate, and it reduces that sense of isolation.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some things that are just naturally different when you're living cross culturally. I think of the time I lived in the Middle East when I was living in a desert, and coming back and just seeing green grass and hearing church bells made me cry because it connected me to part of myself that was gone.
Mm-hmm.
In the other context, I had accommodated to that, but I didn't even realize I missed it until
Yeah.
I experienced it.
It's weird what you don't know represents your country when
Yeah.
you're living. When we lived in Africa, we would vacation sometimes in Mombasa at the coast, and sometimes there would be American military ships docked in the port there,
Hmm.
and you could, the soldiers, I think you could tour the ships. Sometimes they would allow people to come up and walk around on the ship. And my dad, being a military guy, loved the opportunity for that. So I remember going up onto the ship and just seeing a can of Coke and hearing
Hmm.
the sound of it,
Psh.
yeah, the little pop top.
Yeah.
It just, it represented America to me. We had Coca-Cola in Kenya, but it was in the bottles and it just looked American. It sounded American. And the flag, like on the ship, it
Yeah.
just, it flooded us with like missing home and weird things.
Yeah.
Like we don't drink Coke, but it
No.
just was, it represented a lot of
Yeah.
things.
And it was a kind of a heart connection
Mm-hmm.
to kind of that idea of where I'm known or where I can be without having to think.
It's
Or
not what we were thinking about, but yeah.
I'm sure
It's like the little comforts though. I mean,
yeah.
that's an important thing too. There's things that we can easily gather around us in
Yeah.
our home country that bring us comfort and that are familiar. And even those small things when you're living cross culturally
Yeah.
are not available to you.
No, that's true. I
Certain
know.
snacks and
Well, like our attempt to bring peanut butter to friends all over the world.
yeah, so that's a highly coveted thing or a requested thing sometimes when we travel because you can't get the big jars of the processed peanut butter or whatever we do to,
Yeah. Sugar
our
and
commercial
sugared.
add sugar.
Yeah.
So we were trying to bring some peanut butter to friends, and apparently it's regarded as a banned substance
Yeah.
when you bring it through
The TSA
security.
treated it like it was C4.
We don't even say that.
They treated it
But
like it was
it
contraband.
was very special and it was heavy and had taken up a big space in our luggage and it was expensive.
Yeah.
And they just dropped it in the trash.
I had a very angry reaction because she made really good eye contact with us too, and was
As she
just
just
like as she
dropped
dropped
it
it
in
into the garbage. And I just hope that as we walked
Don't
away,
say something that you're going to regret.
Oh. Okay, fair enough. I don't know if I'll regret it or not, so I probably shouldn't say
It's
it.
recorded.
And I'm so tired. I don't know what's going to come out. So maybe we should go to the
Yes.
last. I
So,
think
yes,
that was the last
don't
one.
take away people's familiar comfort things from home
Yes.
when they're
and
living overseas.
very thankful for the TSA and all the work that they do. Although here, this has nothing to do with this talk, but one of my favorite moments this trip
Uh-huh.
was when you got special
Scared.
attention
Oh,
by security.
Yes, I know.
Oh my gosh, it made me so happy.
I think it kind of was sort of sad for you, though, because it's always your story that you get the random security check.
I know, I do like attention.
I know. And this time we were going to our gate in Portugal, and I got selected for the special treatment.
Yeah, well, and they knew
Had to
I
go
was
behind the
together.
screen and everything.
Yeah, Tara had to go to the naughty room.
And I turned around to see where you were going to sit before I got taken back there. I thought maybe it's the last time I'd see you. And you were taking a picture of me.
I sure hope Zachary puts it up on the video.
I think I was not
were-
making a nice face at you.
You were not happy that you were going to the special room, and you were not happy that I was gleefully taking a picture of you going to the special room.
That wasn't very nice.
It was so fun. Well, anyway, all right. So that's
Yeah, part of the joys of traveling.
the joys of traveling and meeting new people.
I met some nice new Portugal police.
You did. I was actually thinking about the New Zealand people that that live in Australia that
Yeah,
you made friends
that
with
we
in
made
Gibraltar.
friends with in Gibraltar. Yeah, we
That's
met
another-
some fellow travelers.
That's another thing that's really nice
That
about
we
cross-cultural
didn't
experience.
even mention people. What is wrong with us?
That's a long list. Here, let me get this. Here's the list of what's wrong
We
with
mentioned
us.
things and experiences, but I'm glad you brought that up, David.
Thank you. It was the most important.
It
and
was
I
because I think we were talking about all of those things and just assuming that's all in relation to people, but truly talking to people
Yeah.
face to face who've grown up in a completely different culture and getting to know them and being accepted by them
Yeah.
and welcomed and being invited into their lives is like probably the biggest honor, I think, of living cross-culturally.
Yeah, it's really some of the most enjoyable cross-cultural moments have either been in some kind of vehicle, like with drivers.
What story are you
Well,
thinking
I was going to say George's name. So, hey, George, like in the car with
Yeah,
George, where
yeah.
he was our security, kept us safe, drove
Yeah.
us around, but also we got to see life through his eyes. We got to see a new experience of the country through his eyes, and just the fellowship, like a
Yeah.
dear friend, and
Being
on
invited into homes.
yeah, and on the bus on the way to Gibraltar, of meeting the
Mm-hmm.
couple where we exchanged phone numbers
Yeah.
and are going to be lifelong pen pals.
That's
Do you
right.
remember pen pals when
Yeah.
we were little? Now
Yeah.
we're having pen pals.
Yeah.
And but then also Elizabeth that cooked that chicken face meal for us
Mm-hmm.
in Rwanda, and just all the people really make the culture shock, make the stress and also the play really valuable.
Yeah. When you're invited. I mean, I think that's every one of these playful, adventurous, discovery positives
Yeah,
also has like a flip side of what can also be a challenge.
yeah,
Because sometimes it takes a while to kind of feel accepted in a community in a different culture.
yeah,
And so feeling on the outside or not being received can be painful.
yeah.
So it's an honor when you are.
And remembering that in the U.S., inviting people over to your home might be a natural thing. In a lot of the cultures where that's not, that's a very private, personal space, and being invited means something, means a lot.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, because not everybody can. We've been really fortunate to be able to travel and live where we've been,
Yeah,
and that's not reality for a lot of people. But you can have cross-cultural experiences in the US.
Yeah.
You can invite, and that's one of the ways that we exposed our kids to cross-cultural living and people, by inviting people over for holidays who were here from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And they would
Yeah.
learn about our Thanksgiving or whatever,
Yeah.
Easter, and we would learn from them. And then, sometimes the next time we'd have them over, we'd make their cuisine, and they'd teach us how we made ugali wrong.
Yeah.
But
or Oli
so
Bolin.
you can do that anywhere.
Yeah.
Anywhere we're living. We just found some rich cultures right around us that we never knew existed.
Yeah. Who knew there was a Uzbekistan restaurant in Wheaton, Illinois?
Yeah. So we try to travel to restaurants in our own neighborhood that are, not frequented by.
But I think you also can experience that within, so dining and food in your local area, but you can also within countries. So whether it's Hungary, US, Kenya, that there's regionality too. I think about our good friends Steve and Paige, and the cross-cultural experiences we had living in Georgia. And we have a Georgian baby, Zachary, who was born there.
I don't know what story you're telling
culturally
here.
different than us. But thinking about just within the U.S., there's so many different experiences.
The different cultures within our country.
Yeah, from where people immigrated. And so it's not, we're talking about living cross-culturally international, but it can be regional. I was working with a couple from Colombia, and it was the coastal versus the mountain, and there was so much difference that impacted their relationship. And in the States as well, that we have to be careful of the assumptions. I guess where I'm going with this is we have to be careful of the assumptions that we make, that it's not just international, but it can be even in our own communities, in our backyards, in our own countries, that we can be open to these different experiences.
Yeah.
So how are we going to end this?
Well, we're going to say thank you all for sticking with us this long,
Yes.
as we fumbled through our jet lag.
As you saw, some cognitive shock.
Seeing us like we really are, and we're longing to end this day.
Yes.
But we're glad we talked about it, because it's really important to us, and we think anybody can seek cross-cultural experiences wherever you are.
Yeah. Hold a lot of things in tension, be curious, and find laughter. Lots.
Yeah, you gotta laugh at yourself.
Lots of laughter. And if you can't laugh at yourself,
Laugh at somebody else. Great.
have a good day. Good night.
Bye-bye.